Namaste. I had a passing thought there that was preoccupying. Whenever Jim shaves, I can't decide if he looks more like my brother or James Garner.
Yeah.
It's kind of...
James Garner. Wow.
You kind of see it?
Yeah.
Especially that picture when he has the cap on Facebook. It's kind of like I thought I was watching the Rockford Files for a minute. Which is random, but that's what I was thinking about when I failed to namaste promptly. And I'd show you a picture of my brother, but he's so short, all that's ever in the frame is like from here up. So we're celebrating the Epiphany today. See, you just had one.
Have one?
Which was January 6th, which was Wednesday, which most churches probably celebrated last weekend, except as I mentioned last weekend, I didn't want to talk about the baptism of Jesus today. And so I pushed the Epiphany back. But I didn't avoid the issues, you know, really. And I tried to avoid the issues even of the Epiphany by not including the gospel reading. And including this reading from Paul, which is strange. It's about, remember Richard Lewis, the comedian?
Yeah.
He was always filled with angst, and he would sort of pace back and forth on the stage and run his hands through his hair. To me, this is Paul. You know, it's Richard Lewis, going back and forth and dictating this stuff. But he's in that sort of in between place. You know, sometimes Paul is very self-aggrandizing while pretending to be self-deprecating. You know, It was no big deal. I got whipped, I got tortured, but I did it all for God. And there's a part of me that
God gave His grace to me the least.
That's
well,
right.
God's people.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was looking at.
there's that. You know, there's two ways to be arrogant in the church. One is to say I'm perfect, and the other one is to say I'm the farthest thing from perfect you'll ever find. In fact, I'm almost a perfect sinner. And it comes around, both of those are saying, pay attention to me. But more importantly here, he's sorting out, what does all this mean? He's trying to come to terms with what he's discovered and what he's still discovering. And it's interesting to note that one of the things he apparently hadn't discovered was that Jesus Christ was God, because he makes that clear distinction. And one of the interesting books about this is Bart Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God. And the answer to the question, which doesn't spoil the book for you if I tell you, is that people simply promoted Jesus. You know, which was a common practice of the time. If you did stuff really well, you were held in higher esteem. If you did stuff in religious circles really well, you might get to be Pope. I mean, I'm using metaphors now, because there was no Pope then. If you were a really, really good Pope, you're probably like a lower level God. You might, you know, be like an angelish. And throughout both Judaism and early Christianity, there was that tendency, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you think about a family member who is really meaningful to you, probably an older family member when you were growing up, you know, they started out, and let's just suppose it was an uncle. Well, they were just your uncle. And then they became your favorite uncle. And then in your mind, they're about better than anybody else's uncle could ever possibly be.
Yeah.
And then you were so close to them, they weren't just really an uncle, they were almost like another parent. And so it's a really normal thing to do, that as we start to appraise people's value to us, we think more and more of them. And we even give them better titles, you know, my favorite uncle. Well, this whole business over here is, first of all, historically really problematic. But it's not trying to be historical. The reason it's historically problematic is the wise men, though they had a lot of money, and gold and frankincense and myrrh, still had to travel like everybody else. by foot and camel. Maybe the occasional donkey. But if you're off in the east and you see a star and you start walking, well, it's going to take a little while. And there's nothing in the biblical record to indicate that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph hung around by the manger for months, perhaps unto years, because they had a feeling the wise men were coming, and they had good stuff with them.
Besides, exactly how precisely does a star provide GPS?
Well, this is a problem. And how many other wise guys from Italy were wandering around? She's picking at him like a bird on a or a monkey. Nitpicking, yeah. How many other wise men were sort of wandering around following wrong stars? Never getting anywhere before they gave up. Were the backwaters east of Bethlehem just full of groups of wise men staggering about with their treasure? So maybe we hold that part of it loosely and say, what the story tries to tell us is that Jesus was really, really special. Why else would people bring gold, which still has value, frankincense, which still has value to those of us with a discerning taste for incense, and
not allergies.
And not allergies, and myrrh, which someone reminded me last week was a spice used for burial. And so now I think myrrh smells terrible, and when you put it in frankincense, you're just ruining good frankincense.
Yes.
But here they are bringing these gifts, and it's signifying that there was an inherent, and not just inherent, but somehow detectable specialness to Jesus. Of course, the story was written long after the fact, when they already knew those things. But it's still really important because it also signifies that it wasn't just Jewish people who were going to get the picture, because these wise men were not Jews. I used to have the kids so well drilled when they were teenagers that in church, if I was talking, I could say there were two kinds of people in the world back in biblical times. There were Jews and I could point to one of them and they'd say, everybody else. But that's what there was. Gentiles was everybody else. And so another undercurrent of this is that Jesus' message and teachings would spread beyond Judaism. This represented an expansion of how they understood religion. Another undercurrent of it is you have to watch the life of Brian to really understand. When the three wise men show up, Brian being the boy who was born in the manger next to Jesus, and the three wise men show up and they run into Brian's manger with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and Brian's mother is saying, what are we supposed to do with this? What's myrrh? And then they set the gifts down and they leave, but they get outside and they realize they're in the wrong place. They run back in and scoop everything up to take it to Jesus. So, what about Epiphany? I mean, really the word talks about awakening. Aha moments. Maybe enlightenment, rather. About this coming to understand and coming to see more deeply. And contemporarily in the West, we put so much value on that. I mean, we're sitting around waiting for the aha moment. We're waiting for Jesus to come surfing in the magic carpet ride back down. We're waiting for a sign, give me a sign, Lord, give me a sign. The end of the movie, the end with Burt Reynolds, is great for that. He's negotiating his safety with God. If he can swim to shore, if I make it to shore, God, I'll be in church every week. And then, as the closer he gets, the more he hedges his bets. The more he backs off those promises.
Every month.
That's right.
I swear I'll go.
Christmas and Easter.
Yeah, I love this Christmas.
So that's why this first reading I thought was interesting when I searched. I found it when I searched for awakening and enlightenment stories, and it happens to be by one of my favorite authors. And and it juxtaposes me, you know. It juxtaposes epiphanies, enlightenments, awakenings, sudden things, and what most of us experience a lot more of, which is learning and growth and development, and maybe a great deal of difficulty pointing to that moment when we started to understand things differently. We just realized one day, holy cow, I see things differently now. And we can't say, it was when I saw that star and packed up my stuff and started to follow it. That's when everything changed. So is it more important when, which moment, at what point in time, our understanding changes, or that our understanding changes? Is it any better to all of a sudden see everything for what it is, boom, than it is to sort of gradually come to see everything as it is? Don't both ways leave us in the same place? And to a certain extent, there's also it's the backslidden argument, right? In conservative Protestant churches where you're saved, if you say the sinner's prayer, because they're biblical, except this sinner's prayer isn't in the Bible.
Yeah, really.
But there's two schools of thought. One is that you come to be saved and everything's going to be okay, and it doesn't matter what you do now. You could set fire to the village, you know, rob banks, you're still saved. And the other one says that you can backslide, and which seems to make sense, right? Except that then you start to see how preoccupied people become with, am I okay? Have I backslidden? And one of the people that tells wonderful stories about this, and painful stories, really, I don't know if he sees it or not, is Carlton Pearson talking about one of his grandparents being backslidden, and still this, for all the enlightenment he's had, he's wondering, are they in heaven, are they okay? And I want to say that if a belief system or a part of a belief system or a way that we're taught we make progress causes us more pain than it gives us joy, we should just throw it away. I mean, it's not, it can't possibly be of God, as we used to say. If it's tearing us up, then no good is going to come of it, because it's life denying. If the whole thing is about how guilty can I make you, so that I can keep you coming back, we need to see that maybe the motivation of the system isn't really what's good for us. And rather than worrying about little nitpicking details, which one had the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, we should worry about bigger pictures. There's the story of the day, fictional day, that the head of the Benedictines, the head of the Franciscans, and the head of the Jesuits all died the same day. And they go up to the gates of heaven to St. Peter, and then Peter says, this is pretty wild, this has never happened before. Three of the largest religious orders in the world dying in the same day. You can go back to any moment in history, but you have to agree on the same moment. And they choose the Nativity. And they go back, and the head of the Franciscans and the head of the Benedictines are kneeling in adoration. And the head of the Jesuits walks over to Joseph and says, have you thought about what you're going to do about the boys' college?
Wow.
So we can get involved in things that seem very important, but that really are exercises in missing the point. We can get involved in adding to our stress instead of trying to find ways to reduce it. We can search for what really happened instead of trying to see what the story is trying to tell us. And in the end, whether that learning comes suddenly or not isn't really the point at all. It's what we experience along